From the downright crazy set of events that led to that amazing finale, to the possibility of a second season involving even more beef, here's Netflix's Beef Season 1 ending explained. Starting off with just what the show's about. I mean, with a name like that, I almost expected Gordon Ramsay to give viewers a masterclass on some excellent meats. So imagine my surprise when I realized that this unique new series would easily be among the best dramas released this year. Beef largely revolves around Danny and Amy, who get involved in a road rage incident that causes the two to have, you guessed it, beef with one another. The series then showcases how the two continue to let that one incident spiral their entire lives as they try to constantly outdo each other by making worse and worse choices at the other person's expense. It's honestly a hilarious look into the lives of two genuinely horrible people who completely despise each other. It helps that Steven Yeun, who plays Danny, and Ali Wong, who plays Amy, are perfectly cast for their roles. The show highlights just how similar the two are, despite their apparent hatred for one another. And it really gets you to feel for these two individuals, because you get to see just how many wrenches life is throwing their way.
What are you doing? Whoa. Stop. Stop.
Of course, they're not exactly angels themselves. I mean, Danny literally pees all over the floor in Amy's expensive house, and in retaliation, she essentially catfishes his brother and has an affair with him. But hey, we've all been there, right? In any case, by the end of the season, Danny and Amy are utterly alone. Turns out all of their terrible actions finally catch up to them, and everyone who once loved and cared about them has removed themselves from their lives for good. But in that brief moment of absolute loneliness, the two do have one person who knows exactly what they're going through, and that's each other. The series ends with Danny being in the hospital after he was shot by George, who thought that he was actually going to harm Amy. It turns out that the two actually bonded while they were out in the desert, and after all that, successfully squashed their beef. But of course, George just had to ruin it, right? Amy, understandably feeling guilty for her part in all this chaos, ends up hugging an unconscious Danny, completely making it clear that the two have let bygones be bygones. It's an excellent way to wrap up a series like this, even if it's just a tad bit cliche. But I suppose it works because of the sheer hell the characters had to endure the previous day. Though I've got a bit of bad news for any Danny-Amy shippers out there. The show's creator told Elle that their hug at the end isn't exactly romantic. Obviously, it's got a few romantic undertones, and showrunner Lee Sung-jin even acknowledged that some viewers may choose to perceive it as such. But it's a lot deeper than that. Lee believes that their connection is a bit more complicated for sure. Like, no one really knows how the two would react to one another the second they leave the hospital room. Will they go back to their old beef-causing ways? Or have their experiences together really managed to lead to some massive changes? Well, it seems that this is left for the audience to decide. And guess what? Joseph Lee, who plays George on the show, thinks the same thing. He believes that their embrace at the end is a lot less romantic and much more spiritual in nature. According to Joseph, it's about two people who are finally reconciling with one another. They're seeing each other for who they really are, and they're doing it at a point in their lives where they've lost everything. It's a genuine embrace where the two accept each other's flaws and realize that maybe forgiveness is the only way to end this vicious cycle they were trapped in. George describes it as a moment of vulnerability and transparency, and honestly, I totally agree. The show is really only powered by the sheer egos of these two characters. So how amazing is it that it ends with them finally throwing their egos to the curb and being vulnerable and honest for the first time? There's also the fact that the music playing in that scene hints at their relationship too. Sung even gave a shout out to that specific track in his interview with Elle, so you know it's gotta be important. The showrunner said that the closing song, Smashing Pumpkins' Mayonnaise, is something he's been wanting to use for a very long time, and they felt like the ending was where it perfectly fit. It's the point in the story where everything combines into one, and a song with lyrics like "Mother, weep the years I'm missing, and all your time can't be given" really does just perfectly blend into that moment. The song is all about regret, lost time, and understanding, and it just perfectly fits the show's storyline and characters. I mean, both Danny and Amy were completely unhappy with their lives, even before they met each other. Amy was stuck in a relationship where she constantly felt like she wasn't good enough, not to mention she pursued a career that didn't exactly make her happy. Though, even after she loses both of those things in the end, she still feels more fulfilled and satisfied in that hospital room with Danny. And the same goes for him too. He completely wasted his potential, and even prevented his brother from going off to college just because he couldn't accept being left behind. Sure, their lives are tragic tales, but it's a story that finally converges in that scene in the hospital and makes them see just how much they need each other, even if they didn't realize it at first. After all, their whole beef with one another is what causes them to finally stop sleepwalking through life. It's fair to say that both of them were just working on autopilot like zombies. They didn't really realize how much they truly hated their lives until they got into a fight with one another and concentrated all that pent-up aggression and hatred toward each other. But that hug at the end may have just made them wake up once and for all. Yun even thinks that there's some truth to this theory. He added that Danny and Amy were so strictly set in their routines, they truly needed the help of a complete stranger to come into their lives like a meteor and completely shake things up. Sure, they may have just used this as an excuse to let loose and cause a ton of violence and chaos, but it's still something that the two needed to do. Lee compares it to couples therapy, kind of. Sometimes couples need therapy when they're stuck in these painful routines and find it difficult to break out of them. Danny and Amy's relationship, while incredibly toxic, is definitely the push that the two needed to realize the terrible trajectory of their lives. And by the end, it's clear that the two have really snapped out of it, leaving room for some positive change. And much of this reconciliation came from the literal hours they spend out in the desert. Honestly, that entire sequence was so trippy that I'm not really surprised that some people are making theories that the two actually died right after their car crash at the end of the second last episode. I mean, it was kind of tough to believe both of them managed to get out of that accident alive, but I think that's probably a bit too much even for this show. Plus, it kind of undervalued the amazing interactions they had in the desert. While in search for some food, the two end up eating poisonous berries, and well, it causes them to lose all sense of time and space. As the two see each other fade in and out, they finally let out their darkest secrets and discuss with each other just what they feel about one another and the rest of the world.
I was trying to return these hibachi grills that I bought to kill myself.
It's such a perfect sequence to have them all vomit out their feelings, while also quite literally vomiting out those poisonous berries. Plus, because they're half asleep, you never really know if the other person was even awake to hear each other's confessions and thoughts. Though, with how perfectly wrapped up their relationship was, it's sort of hard to tell if a second season will happen. Don't get me wrong, like I'm sure many of you definitely want to see more Amy-Danny beef, but it's tough to see where the series could go from this point on. In a way, it kind of played out like an anthology series, and if season 2 really does happen, I think it may involve a completely new cast of characters who end up getting involved in a fresh new beat. Sung did mention that he pitched the series as a limited anthology, which is probably why the show ended the way that it did. But hey, this is Netflix we're talking about. If the show does well, I definitely think they'll try to get fans for a second season. But I suppose for now, we'll just have to wait and see what they've got cooking.
I think the reason a stranger has to kind of be the one that snaps Danny and Amy out is because they are so entrenched in their pattern.
But with the possibility of a second season involving even more beef, to the downright crazy set of events that led to that amazing finale. That was Netflix's Beef Season 1 ending explained.